Dr. Michelle Mulvihill, good afternoon, and welcome to the Zero Tolerance Summit here in the University Hotel, University of the Philippines. It's delightful to have you here. I'm going to do a little introduction first, and then I'll hand over the reins to you. Does that sound all good? You can hear me?
All right. I can hear you. Yeah.
Thank you. So Michelle Kathleen Mulvihill, she's a duly trained and registered clinical and organizational psychologist. She has been practicing for nearly 30 years. She has a bachelor's degree in arts, psychology, from Charles Sturt University. She has a graduate diploma in counseling from the same university. She has a master's degree in interdisciplinary studies from the University of New South Wales and a master's degree in adult education from the University of Technology in Sydney. She also has a doctorate in philosophy from the University of Technology, Sydney, which she completed while working full-time. And you know how hard it is to work full-time and do a doctorate. She is currently the Director and Principal Consultant of Core Psych Australia Proprietary Limited. Her work includes being a consultant to mainly not-for-profit organisations in a range of areas, working nationally and internationally. And she works as an executive coach, an individual psychotherapist, lecturer, and consultant to many diverse people and groups, including schools, welfare organisations, legal firms, and commercial enterprises. She has training and research expertise in trauma and its effects on groups. This has had a particular focus on the effects of child sexual assault on children and adults. She has worked as a lecturer in psychology at the Australian Catholic University, a lecturer in counselling at the Institute of Counselling in Sydney, a lecturer in psychology and adult development at the University of Technology, Sydney. She is the only living person to have met with all 74 victims that came forward and disclosed abuse by the St. John of God Brothers in New Zealand. She has met with each victim one by one at various locations around New Zealand, and she kept notes at all these meetings. She is professionally qualified to offer evidence as to the impacts of abuse in an institutional context, very much like Tom Doyle, expert witness, and the appropriate response to the disclosure of it. Her professional experience and background further qualifies her in this regard. She also has first-hand knowledge of the disclosures made in relation to St. John of God Order and their response to them. She therefore sees herself as uniquely qualified in this matter. Although today she will not be speaking specifically about the St. John of God Order, she will be focusing on a topic that she's called the silence of the lambs. But if you have questions in the open forum about her role in relation to St. John of God Order and the number of pedophiles and pederasts in that order, I invite you to question her at the open forum about that. She has expertise in the assessment and treatment of trauma. Interestingly for many people here, she was a member of the Sisters of Mercy in Australia, working in the area of counselling and education, particularly with Aboriginal Australians for a period of time between 71 and 84. In simple terms, she was a nun during that period. So without further ado, it's my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Michelle Mulvihill.
Thank you, Murray. And thank you, everyone. I'd just like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land in which I'm sitting. It seems extraordinary that I'm sitting in a land that is owned by other people to the Philippines, which is a long way away. So I would like to acknowledge those custodians, the people of the Gundungara, and also the Darawal people of the Eora Nation. And I would like to extend my respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders who might be listening or watching or in the room today. Murray, I sit here thinking you're talking about someone else when I hear all those things you've just said. Yeah. But it also indicates that I've been around for a while and probably working in this area of abuse and clergy and the Catholic Church well since the 1970s that I first began to hear about it, but working more actively and involved in it since the late 80s. The silence of the lambs, the psychological manipulation and fear and control used by the Catholic Church worldwide in silencing lay people from engaging in issues surrounding clergy abuse. This is not paper to beat up the church. We are the church, or we were. This is about some things I've learned along the way and some things I'd like to see happen as we go through. And I applaud you in your role and your great work of wanting to end clergy abuse. I pay tribute to you in trying to make that happen worldwide, and there's a great deal to do. The silence of lay people in the Catholic Church, including religious brothers and nuns, so I put religious inside the laity area, regarding the sexual abuse by children, it's been very complex. It's very multifaceted. It's influenced by cultural and institutional and psychological factors. And there's a whole complex combination of loyalty, fear, social pressures, institutional minimisation of the problem that contributed to this. I must say I've been a bit shocked by it. My own sister is a sister of St. Joseph of Boston. And I've been to Boston on many occasions to visit her. And the silence in the Boston area, of course, was not as profound after the Boston Globe began publishing its journalistic inquiries. But the silence of the people around me is extraordinary. And I'd like to say some more about that. While recent efforts by the Church to announce increased safeguarding and transparency have been made in a lot of different places, and I'll talk about Australia in particular, there remains significant and very, very painful issues for both survivors and victims. And I pay my respects today to those victims and survivors in the room and say to you how proud I am to know that you're there, and how sorry I am for the pain you must have experienced and maybe still experiencing. There's a whole combination of secrecy, inaction, denial, victim blaming, advocate blaming, legal manipulation that results in safeguarding of children and vulnerable adults not really happening. And this is 40 years after I've certainly first been engaged with this topic. This has resulted in years of suffering for victims and for survivors. And I'm using those two words on purpose. I'll explain those as we go along. So the paper today outlines what we already know. What are the things that we understand as being the reasons that laity are suppressed, including victims and survivors, over the last 50 years. And it illustrates today, I hope, key factors with some recent examples. The title, The Silence of the Lambs, holds deep symbolic and thematic significance within the context of the story of the clergy abuse of children throughout the world. And the movie encompasses elements of trauma, psychological manipulation, and the characters' internal struggles. For those of you who might not have seen this movie, the memory of the Silence of the Lambs comes from an incident in the film's protagonist's life, Clara Starling, who, as a young girl, witnessed the death of her father and was left with the emotional burden of that loss. In the film, the memory of the Silence of the Lambs comes from an incident in her childhood when she was sent to live on a farm where she heard the cries of the lambs being slaughtered. Clarice, haunted by this event, recalls how she couldn't save them and that the silence that followed represents her feelings of helplessness and her unresolved trauma. It was this silence I heard in New Zealand, sitting with 74 victims and their families, each of whom had some kind of intellectual or other disability. Throughout the film, Clarice's interactions with Dr. Hannibal Lecter, as well as her pursuit of the serial killer called Buffalo Bill, force her to confront her past and her silence over her inability to save the lambs. The resolution of her emotional conflict is symbolically tied to her ability to find her voice and overcome the silence of her past traumas. The Silence of the Lambs, as a title, is also a metaphor for the silencing of victims, particularly those kidnapped by Buffalo Bill. These victims are bound, gagged, and held captive, symbolising their silence both physically and metaphorically. I would argue that the silence represents their suffering and their ability to escape this torment, much as victims of clerical abuse are also made silent. The lambs can be seen as innocent, vulnerable individuals who are victims of horrific violence, paralleling the silence of the abused who cannot speak and those who cannot be heard. Perhaps you're already beginning to join a few dots here between the metaphors being offered and the deep helplessness that advocates like you and me might feel in the face of confronting the mighty Catholic Church over the silencing of the children and adults who have been attacked and raped and then killed off in terms of memory by Catholic clergy and its hierarchy. To just let me take this one step further to finish my interpretation of the metaphor. The role of Dr. Hannibal Lecter in the role of continuing the silence is an awakening about the role of the official church. Hannibal, the incarcerated cannibalistic serial killer, plays a crucial role in the symbolic silence. He is a figure of intellectual control and manipulation who communicates in subtle, cryptic ways, often using language to assert dominance over others. Sound familiar? In a sense, Lecter represents a kind of institutional silence because his actions and words are carefully calculated to disturb and disorient those around him. Hannibal's role in the film is to confront the silence. Whether it's the silence of the victims, the silence of the past, or the silence in the minds of people who are complicit or unable to act, we don't know. But I will return to this metaphor towards the end of the paper. It was about 1975, and I was a very energetic young religious with a veil on and a cross around my neck. I was out to save the world and to change everything that could be changed in our mighty church. I worked and lived in a country diocese about 400, 500 kilometres from Sydney. And we were surrounded by children, most of whom had never been to a city, never seen the beach, never seen a skyscraper, ridden on a bus or a train, didn't know the sound of what the world might be like outside their tiny towns. So a number of young religious like myself and the younger priests got together and said, why don't we organise a camp? Let's take them to the city. Let's get them on a bus. We'll raise the money. And we did. And this was called a Christian camp. We stayed quite a way out of the city because it was cheaper. And these kids for 4 days came to the city. They touched the water. They smelt the sea, the salt. They could taste it. We went to Luna Park, which is like an amusement centre, across the Harbour Bridge, went to St Mary's Cathedral even to Mass. Excitement was in the air. And this went on for some years, probably 2 years that I was involved. The following year, we were getting ready to go on the camp, and news came through that the bishop had cancelled the camps. I was furious. How dare he do that? What on earth is he doing? These kids love this. Their parents want it. Everyone's happy. Nothing ever goes wrong. It's terrific. So, of course, I made an appointment myself to go down and see the bishop. Why wouldn't I? Go and knock on his door and say, what's going on? I wasn't going to be waiting for someone to tell me what to do. And in fact, all of us on the team made appointments with the bishop. So he had one after the other, after the other, after the other, which he must have wondered what on earth is going on. I turned up to meet him. I'm sitting in the waiting room, and as I was about to be called to go in to genuflect to him and kiss his ring, my provincial superior walked out of his office looking at me like, what are you doing here? I knew she wouldn't be there to talk about the cancelling of the camp. Anyway, I was a bit nervous, but went in full of youthful zest and said, my lord, what is happening? Why are you cancelling this camp? The children do this, the children do that. We have so many Aboriginal children coming. They come for free, all of this. And he shuffled around for a while and he said, well, it's just not a good idea and I just don't want it to continue. And I kept pushing the point, why? Why are you doing this? And he said to me in 1975, Sister Michelle, you don't understand that there are some priests who take children on camps and sexually abuse them. I think I would have gone paler than I probably even look today. Like my mouth went dry. Like, what? But I said, the priests we have, they're wonderful priests. They do nothing wrong. Blah, blah. No, he said, the camp's off. So I had to leave with my tail between my legs. And of course, he subsequently cancelled all the other appointments because he knew we were all coming in to say the same thing. But he knew. They all knew. He'd just been at a bishop's conference in 1975. Stuff was happening, but nobody else had been told. And that was the end of the story.
That's 50 years ago. 50 years ago.
That's it. So look, I think there's several factors that contribute to the silence. And these are things we already know, and I'm sure all of you already know. So this is just a little refresher bit, just so we can put them on these things on the table, because we don't need to be silent about them, I don't believe, in any way. And the first thing is institutional protectiveness. The Catholic Church has historically prioritised its reputation and institutional image over transparency. I can give you 1,000 examples if you want. Church officials often deal with allegations of abuse internally, seeking to avoid public scandal. And before you say, oh, but they don't do that now, they outsource it to independent people, you are wrong. It is dealt with internally and it is contracted out to lawyers who do whatever they can to save money. The second point is the reason for silence: power dynamics and hierarchy. You see, the clergy's hierarchical structure contains immense power and influence. And there's a belief that church should not be publicly disgraced. Well, that's fair enough. No organisation wants to be publicly disgraced. But the management of the scandal continues to disgrace the organisation and to keep people quiet. The secrecy in handling the matters ensured abuse cases were never made public. I remember sitting down at one of the first meetings with the St John of God brothers in Sydney, 4 brothers at the table, a lawyer, sometimes 2. I didn't know that one of them would end up in jail a few years later and that the other 3 should be there. So the secrecy and transparency of things being held inside the structure and not even telling people that who are there to help, like myself at that time, to work with them and with the victims, not telling me what was going on, hiding the facts and continuing to do that. My third point is this lack of effective reporting mechanisms. That now is outsourced too. I believe some victims want to speak to the head person. They don't want to speak to some deputy down the line. They want to speak to the Lone Ranger, not the Tonto. They want to get in there and tell that person what is going on and why. The continued failure to encourage reporting, I believe, puts pressure on victims to remain silent. And it puts pressure on other people, including church officials, to kind of dodge taking any action against abusers. That continues to this day. I can extrapolate on any of these points if you wish me to. Number 4, the fear of legal and financial consequences. You know enough about that. The most expensive lawyers were hired to make sure that George Pell was excused from the findings of the judge and jury in his case, Cardinal Pell, in Melbourne, and basically got him out of jail. That would have cost lots and lots of money. So on one hand, there's the fear of legal and financial consequences, which then gets mixed up with spending enormous amounts of money, which should be sent to victims. Don't forget that clergy who are Catholic clergy believe that they engage in ontological change when they are ordained. They are not men anymore. They're not having a sex change. They're having a God change. They are ontologically changed, which means they cannot be challenged. If that's your point of view, then that leads to an offering of misguided compassion and minimising the severity of any abuse. For some church officials, of course, the fear of repercussion should they speak out, and I mention in particular Bishop Jeff Robinson in Sydney, for example, means that their career is over. They can't go anywhere. They won't be going up the chain. They won't be doing anything. Number 6, there is a lot of delayed recognition of the problem. There are red flags that pop up everywhere. I see them anyway, and I'm sure many of you do too. But they're denied and not viewed. I remember being taken to visit an older pedophile brother of St. John of God in Sydney to his apartment. He avoided being extradited from Australia to face charges and was probably the second most prolific pedophile in that group in 3 countries. He welcomed me in. I was there to talk to him, to find out what his point of view was, what his story was. And there is porn all over the kitchen, on the fridge, on the stove, on the cupboards. Like, what? Don't they get it? How can this be? And how many other places have hangouts just like that? And the number 7, finally, what we also know is there is enormous resistance to reform. Not only has the church had to turn itself backwards, inside out, to get rid of Vatican II, to make sure that priests wear the proper clothes now, the collars and the berettas. Do you know that berettas were actually invented to stop lice from falling out of priests' hair into their food, by the way? Anyway, the institutional inertia continues to fuel reform efforts. Changing long-standing practices or admitting fault has never been in the playbook. And despite some attempts at reform in more recent years, the latest misguided response from church spokespeople, I believe, is to nominate worse catastrophes that are happening in this world than child sexual abuse. Well, look what's happening in Pakistan. That's worse than child sexual abuse. Look what's happening in other countries where there's earthquakes and genocide. That's worse than child sexual abuse. So what are you complaining about, Michelle? They're the kinds of comments I've heard and that I get and that I feel shocked at. Because, again, it's a resistance, it's a denial, and it's an aberration, particularly to those people who are victims. So, what have lay people learned about the Catholic Church, and how is it that they're kept silent? Well, while many people, like many of you in your room today, have spoken out against the abuse, the silence or the inaction of the majority, in my view, has been a significant and very troubling aspect of clergy sexual abuse. And I make this point with the experience that those of us who are victims, who work for victims and survivors, can be seen almost as criminals, delinquents in the eyes of many churchgoers and many officials. I've had many dinner party conversations brought to silence in my own home because people do not want to talk about this. They do not want to hear about it. It's one of the taboo topics, I believe, in some quarters. Speaking out is seen as being disloyal, and therefore the advocate, you, me, totally untrustworthy. And they will go to any extent they wish to make sure that you are seen as that. For myself, I've been banned. In my practice has been banned in 3 Catholic dioceses in New South Wales. They do not want me to hang around with in their schools or in their hospitals or anywhere that might break the silence of what they really don't want heard. We're seen as being anti-Catholic, unchristian, and therefore discouraging those of us who speak to not have a voice. So what are the reasons for some of this institutional silence? Well, trust and loyalty in the church make it difficult for some lay people to believe allegations of abuse or to confront the reality. The emotional attachment that some have to the church and its leadership makes it challenging for many to accept the severity of the abuse and to speak out the institution they had grown up to trust and rely on. And that goes for religious men and women as well. I had a phone call recently from a woman I was in the convent with back in the late 1970s. I left that work in 1985. This woman's in her 70s, her late 70s. She lives on an old age pension. She's alone. She has never had a partner. She lives in social security housing, housing, very poor. She's a hoarder, has no family. Her parents have died. Her brother has moved away somewhere. She has no nieces or nephews. She's basically alone. And I hadn't heard from her for 50 years or so. And I got this call one day. And she told me this amazing story. Not so amazing now that I come to think of it. Not just about her current situation, her mental health problems and her physical health problems. She was asking for my help because she needed someone to go and talk to the housing department about not shifting her out of her home. And I was the only person she could think of. She told me that at the age of 26, in her community room in one of the towns in the Newcastle diocese in New South Wales, the parish priest had entered the community room when there was nobody else at home except her. Of course, he raped her in the community room. After she got over the shock and horror of that, she went into hiding. She was a student, so all the other nuns are out at work and she's there by herself. And we trust Father, he's got a key of the convent. He came in a second time, but she was better organised this time and locked herself in her bedroom. And finally, she got the courage to tell the sisters. Well, guess what happened? Nothing. They went, oh, well, you've always been a bit funny, you know, you've always had a few problems. You're not the most reliable of people to say that. And Monsignor has been here for many, many years. So Monsignor he's a very good man. It's dreadful what you're saying about him. Would that encourage you to go to the police or to cry out louder? No. So what happened? She shut it in. About 20 years later, she left quite late in her life with nothing. I think she got a payment of probably 3,000 or 4,000 Australian dollars, which is about 2,000 American dollars, to set up her own life, which subsequently had collapsed. So after talking to her several times and sorting out her housing for her and so on, I said, what about if I ring the Sisters of Mercy? Will you let me? Because someone needs to tell them that you need help. You need the sisters' help. There are many still around who were with you in the convent in those days. And can I tell them about the rape? So she agreed, finally, because she was so desperate. I made the phone call. I rang up the woman whom I knew from previous life, who was in charge of child safeguarding, or whatever the term is used now. She listened to the story with shock. Really? That's terrible, Michelle. This is awful. Of course we can do something. We could send, if she wanted to see some sisters, we'll go out, we'll help her. We will fill up her fridge, we'll look after her. And I'll go back to the office and I'll find out who she needs to speak to in relation to her rape. The rape, by the way, had been reported in the Newcastle Herald because a second religious woman had come out and accused this man of rape, and he did jail time. So it was all there. There's lots and lots of evidence. Nothing happened. I waited for phone calls and return calls, so I rang again. But this time I got put through to a woman who is a lawyer and who works for the sisters today in Australia and who manages complaints. Well, she was pretty put out, really. When I said that I know canonically that the religious, when you leave, you sign a document to say that you're not going to ask anything else from them. Thank you very much. But I also knew canonically that there was a view that pastoral care should be offered to any ex-religious for the rest of their life. This woman had done 25 years. She, of course, laughed at me. She said she'd never heard anything so silly in her life. She couldn't find that in canon law. And, of course, it isn't. It's in the spirit of canon law. So I said, well, I really want some help. This woman needs help. She needs a couple of kinds of help. She needs help just morally, just to kind of get herself alive again. She needs to see some people that she knows. She needs some company. She needs some money. She can't get her teeth done. She doesn't get her hair done. She depends on public transport and can barely walk. She critically needs care. And then secondly, she needs some assistance to know where to go for redress for what's happened to her. Well, of course, nothing happened again. It's another week or 2 or 3. So you kept waiting. Part of the trick. Then I got an email. They didn't even bother to ring up and say, no, we're not going to help. I just got an email that said, here are the phone numbers and email addresses of the agencies this woman can go to. Here's the Catholic one, and here's the state one, and here's the number of the police. Goodbye. We haven't heard boo since. What is this about? What is happening? Catherine McCauley would be rolling in her grave as the founder of the Sisters of Mercy. Well, it seems they were very afraid. They were very afraid of this coming out again. They were very afraid of this woman finding her voice, and they left her for dead, literally. Now, we've been able to get some other help, but that is not the point. When asking for help, someone who hasn't got a computer, probably doesn't have a phone, can't communicate with anybody very well, told, here are the email addresses, just do that. Why else is there silence? Well, secondly, clericalism and the power structures that I've spoken about again contribute to an environment where lay people can feel very powerless to question or challenge the actions of clergy members, sometimes because those clergy members are their employers. You will lose your job, or you could. The church's power and influence over local communities, including schools, healthcare, and social programs, means ostracism or retribution for challenging the status quo. A very good friend of mine went back to the classroom, having been a principal for many years, and she took up year 6 in the local parish of Carlingford in Sydney. It was a very happy school, big school, maybe 900 kids. The parish priest, of course, lived on the property in a red brick veneer house, which always looked very locked up with no windows opened. Always worries me, and close to the church. The teacher noticed after her first day or two that when she looked out the window of her classroom with year 6 girls, the priest's underwear washing was often on the line, the clothes line, which was over the other side of the fence next to the classroom. She found this very disturbing. Like, this is what is going on? What's this about? A day later, Father Egan, Finian Egan, now deceased, having done time in jail in Sydney, would send down to the classroom for 2 girls to come up to help him with photocopying. And my friend asked the girls, is this regular? Yes, we do this all the time. Okay. So the first time she allowed them to go, but then checked with the principal, who was very cagey about it, very uncertain about it. Father Egan would spend the first hour of every school day sitting in the principal's office reading the paper opposite her desk, just to make sure nothing was happening. It turns out later that Father Egan was also touching up many of the young teachers. By many, I mean he'd been there for 14 years or something. Young teachers in the photocopy room, as some people do. And the young teachers were terrified. And they'd been to the principal to tell her. But no one says anything. The teacher doesn't want to lose their job. The principal doesn't want to lose her job. What can they do? Answer, stay out of the photocopy room when Father comes over. So my friend goes back to her classroom, having told the principal she's concerned about the underwear on the, which sounds like a very small thing, doesn't it? You know? But what did it indicate? What does it indicate to young girls? And what does it indicate? And what happened to them when they go up to Father to do the photocopying? There's no supervision. Father, it turned out, was a serial pedophile. And as I've said previously, he did time in jail. But it doesn't end there, because someone, I wonder who, rang the local police and said, I am really worried about this man. This is his behaviour. They put me through to a detective, who then said, oh, thank heavens, someone's rung us up. We've been trying to get people at that school to talk to us for a long time because we have had historical complaints against this bloke. Will you come in and give a statement? Certainly, I said. But, and would your friend come in and give a statement? Definitely, I said. And we both did so, only to find out that the principal and every other teacher had said no. They were not going to the police. They would not give evidence. The grip of silence was amazing. Why was it there? Well, because the following Sunday after Mass, the priest's friend, who is a lawyer and a member of Opus Dei, I believe, got up in the pulpit at homily time and threatened the congregation, said to the congregation, I want to know from you who has been making up these things. He left the pulpit and stomped up and down the aisle because you will be sued for defamation. This went on in a church during Mass. You are not to say these things about Father. He's a very good man, etc. Institutional silence or denial creates an atmosphere where lay people are discouraged from questioning or confronting the reality of abuse, and the taboo and the shame surrounding discussions about abuse, particularly sexual abuse, is often viewed as shameful and uncomfortable. Along with this, certainly gender dynamics play a role in the silence surrounding clergy abuse. In patriarchal societies, you know and I know that the silence of women and children is expected. Women are often not given a voice or not believed, making it harder for them to speak out, for us to speak out against abuse or advocate for reform. Some lay people feel that confronting this abuse will make them question their faith. Of course it is, and of course it will. And in many cases, in my view, lay people are not fully aware of the extent of the abuse. They do not know. I've spoken to so many directors of education, people in charge of hospitals, employing thousands of people who have no idea what's going on. Because in Australia, unlike some other states in the United States, the bishop and archbishop refused to publish the names and numbers of pedophiles and of predators who have serious allegations against them, or in fact have had charges against them. And the fear of legal repercussions, if one speaks out, can be a key factor for contributing to the silence. I had police knocking at my door in my own home 20 years ago. 2 police with guns, a detective, a man with a video camera, videotaping me and my computer screen and my home, going through every room, looking for hidden documents that belong to the St. John of God brothers. See, if you hang out with pariahs, sometimes you get treated like one. And that examination took about 2 hours, going through every single document. I pleaded with them not to take my computer. It was my only work tool. So they opened every document and photographed it, and so on. They thought I was covering up for the brothers. I wasn't. I just didn't know the extent of what was going on around me. These kind of invasions happened. So I got sent a bunch of flowers and then a taxi an hour later to pick me up and drive me an hour and a half away from my home to another suburb to meet after hours with the brother's lawyer. He was so worried about what I might have had and what they might have read. The brothers then lodged a court case to get the documents back that they took. So there was nothing much in the documents I had at my home. And at the end of the day, when they opened up the box, it was pretty empty. So retaliation is a reality for speaking out. Let's return to the silence of the lambs. Dr. Lester was a brilliant psychiatrist and a do-gooder until he became a psychopath and an instrument of evil. He is now in an arrogant, inhuman world where knowledge, secret knowledge, is power. Whatever its contents, the silence of a secret is always dangerous. Lester dribbles clues to Clara, the detective, as to the identity of his former patient, Buffalo Bill. He delights in using his skills to deliberately confront Clara's silence, her unresolved childhood trauma, tantalizing her with the slow repetition of the words screaming, 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 screaming of the lambs, licking his lips as he pronounced the words until even the viewer is shocked into a feeling of helplessness as the viewer visualizes the ongoing slaughter of these lambs. Then he escapes foreign soils after perpetrating more evil acts on his captors, taking his evil knowledge with him. The Catholic Church's cover-up of sexual abuse has involved a combination of secrecy, inaction, denial, victim blaming, and legal manipulation. Like the lambs, the results are years of suffering and even death, for some, along with the silence in their own community. While in recent years there have been some efforts to right these wrongs, the damage remains. The silence of lay people about the Catholic Church's abuse crisis can be attributed to a complex combination of loyalty, fear, social pressures, and institutional cover-ups. However, as more and more people come forward, we do not need any more lambs to be murdered or to be killed off. So what should we do? And I've got one eye on the clock, Murray. And there's a whole list of things that I've got here about what we could do that you can read. While some people have spoken out and acted against the abuse, the silence or inaction of the majority has been a significant and troubling aspect. And I make this point very clearly. But be ready. If you're going to speak out, be ready to be hurt, to be ignored. I have people who cross the street who won't speak to me. To be sacked, to be told things about yourself that are not true, that echo some of the evil that we're contending with. Look out for the red flags. Make noise. Continue to make noise. Be ready to lose lifelong friends and even some family members or people you've known for a very long time, because that can be the price of calling out injustice when we see it. We do not need to lose any more people. We do not need to have this aberration continuing in our communities. We need to find our voices widely and loudly and to shout it until it is heard, not to shame, not to blame, but to bring at least some safety to children whom we are now trying to safeguard. I wish you all the best for your conference. Thank you, Murray.
Thank you, Michelle. It's really important that we have female voices at the summit. Female voices are not male voices. When we hear someone of the intellectual clout, courage of Michelle, and we hear Anne and Susie, and we hear Ifich Pataka, and tomorrow you'll hear another remarkable woman, Gail Grossman-Frame, speaking. These voices are critical, and what I'm going to do now, Michelle, I'm assuming you'll be able to hear. I'm going to open. I'll say that Michelle's paper is available, and we happily share it with you. All the papers presented at this summit are open and available to anyone that wants to use them to educate themselves. I'm going to open the summit to questions. Can you hear this okay, Michelle?
Very faintly.
Faintly? How's that? Is that better?
A little bit.
Yeah. Oh, all right. That's because I'm a very shy, retiring, humble person. We'll get somebody with a louder voice coming on in a second. So I'm going to hand it over to the open forum. Who would like to start with interacting with Michelle? I'll hand you the microphone, Michelle. And just introduce yourself. Thank you.
Hi, Michelle.
Hey.
I'm Leanne from the Philippines. I consider myself a lay missionary and a worker for nonprofit organizations. It really struck me earlier when you said we are the church, or we were the church. I'm very sensitive about this phenomenon of people leaving the church, whether as priests, religious, or lay, because of this scandal. I serve as a focus group discussion leader at the annual International Safeguarding Conference at the Gregorian University in Rome, which Father Hans Zollner convenes every year. And at the focus group discussion this past year, 2024 in June, a representative from the Australian Bishops' Conference was my group. And, you know, my co-facilitator and I were talking about how we assist victims with legal assistance. And his response to that was that it's such an outdated response. It's such an it's so stupid. He said it's an obsolete or outdated carrot and stick, you know, approach to the. It's so nuts. Yeah, but so so that's temperature check.
Yeah.
On where people are with regards to giving to Caesar what's due to Caesar. I just wanted to say that, but
What did he mean? What's an
he meant that it's outdated to bring priests to court.
outdated?
Yeah. He said it's like using a stick and a carrot, like reward and punishment system. It's outdated. That was his main comment. I just wanted to bring that to the conversation since you're from there. And
The deep denial is amazing, isn't it? The denial about what's happening, the fear of what could happen, and the arrogance of going, well, you know, just walking right past this, it's over. That's an old, outdated thing to do. Which is shocking.
yeah, I just wanted to say that.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, so next person.
Comment.
Oh, no, please, come on. Each person coming up will introduce themselves. Michelle, so you know where they're from, what they're at.
Hi, Michelle. My
Hello.
name is Ann Barrett Doyle. I'm with bishopaccountability.org.
I've heard of you. You're a star.
Well, you're a star. That's what I wanted to say, is that we've just been following your work for a long time. Just blown away by what you've done. And I just loved your analysis. I'm so glad it's written down, because now I'm going to watch Silence of the Lambs again and be more scared than I was before. So,
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. It was lovely to see your face and see you in person. I'm very sorry I was unable to travel to the Philippines due to family issues. I would have loved to have been there and to spend time with you guys, and maybe we can talk further along the way. Yeah,
I would really like that. And it's
I would too.
there's a lot of dynamic people working with children here in the Philippines, especially in the safeguarding space.
Yes.
So,
Yeah, well, I'd love that. Yeah. Murray's got my details. Yeah.
excellent. All right.
Thank
Just
you.
wanted to say that.
Thank you, Anne. Thank you.
Thank you. Who else would like to speak with Michelle? So I just like to make a comment. Michelle's work in New Zealand was historic, extremely harrowing. She was employed by St. John of God to act as an intermediary, as an expert psychologist in interfacing with survivors. And she spoke with 74 survivors in New Zealand. Michelle, I just would like you to state the numbers of pedophile and pederastic men in St. John of God. I believe there were 24 involved.
Yes.
That you
Yes.
spoke about.
Yeah.
Would you like to tell the people here how many actually were sexually abusive men?
Well, the Royal Commission in Australia added up the numbers and came up with 40%. So
40.
we had 40%. So we had 18 that I knew of out of 40 men. Some of those, 1 or 2 or 3 had passed away. The people who came from Ireland were pedophiles. They sent out 6 pedophiles as a foundation for the Australian St. John of God order without telling anybody. And of course, from thence it just grew. So the behaviour went on. Some of these brothers joined at a very young age, like 14 or 15, and pederasts, of course, then abused them, and they went on to do further abusing themselves. But it was a most humbling experience of my life to sit down with that number of wonderful men and their families and listen, because that's the only way we can break the silence, is to listen to what these people have to say.
Yes.
And to process it. It was they who blew the whistle on what was going on. I was just, a rabbit in the headlights for a while, because it just seemed like impossible to know what was going on. Anyway, so amazing experience. And of course, then being accused myself of not going to the police. Why didn't I go to the police, for example? I was told they had been to the police. I was told the men were going to the police. I was told the brothers were cooperating fully with the police. Then the police arrive at my door. Like, no, they weren't. No, they didn't. They're telling lies. I didn't figure that out. I was pretty dumb, naive, innocent. I didn't know till much, much later in the piece what was and was not happening. But look, I think there's a much clearer picture about this today, and I hope that all the experts in the room, in your room there today at the hotel, will really continue their enormous work of networking and contacting until we get all the pieces of this jigsaw puzzle on the table. I'll say good night.
Hold on, don't go yet. You've still got,
Okay.
yeah, you've got an Australian wanting to have a word with an Australian, so you'll be able to stand his English pretty good.
Thanks, Michelle. It's Kieran Tapsell here.
Hello.
One of the things which intrigued a lot of people during the Royal Commission was whether or not the religious orders and the priesthood actually attract people who were sexually attracted to children.
Yes.
Now, I was a bit shocked by those numbers when they came out, 40% of the John of God, 30% of the Christian Brothers, etc., etc. The Royal Commission didn't, so far as I can recall, never actually said, well, yes, there is a connection there. But I always thought with the St. John of God brothers, there was a situation there where these people were intellectually often incapacitated.
Yes.
And not likely to complain. And I do know one priest in Sydney who had got a 10-year sentence, worked his way into being the chaplain for the deaf
Yeah,
their abuse.
that's right.
So that they, and not all the parents had learned sign language, so there was hardly likely to be a complaint. What's your view about that? Do you think that was a connection there?
Look, I think there's a couple of things that you're talking about there, Kieran. And the first one is sometimes I think people join religious orders because they don't know what to do with themselves, and that's a good place to try and work it out. To work out, am I a heterosexual person? Am I a homosexual person? They don't even know what the question is. They just know that I don't fit elsewhere. That's the first thing that I'd say. And then it can slowly dawn on some people. And I think this is where the Royal Commission couldn't kind of work it out, because there's a thing called adult development, where we as human beings, as you know, grow and develop our identity over time. Over the last 50 years, men and women have joined, like myself, had joined religious orders aged 17 or 18. The stage of adult development one is at is not fully resolved. You do not know who you are yet. You won't really know until you're in your 20s or 30s. So there, first of all, I think religious life provided a space in which people could try out different things. What people didn't know, for example, Christian Brothers or St. John of God Brothers or De La Salle Brothers, was that there were hardened pedophiles in those groups who I think attracted and cultivated a guru following. Because if you look at many of the the people who were the worst abusers, being the most prolific, all of them have similar characteristics. They're very much a joker. They're usually good looking. They only choose good looking men or women. And they take on guru status. So you're either in the crowd or you're out of the crowd. Sometimes not knowing, just knowing that I'm part of something and I've joined religious life. I want to be part of something. So now I am. And oh my God, look at what I'm part of. It's a cesspit, but I can't get out of it. I can't escape it. I can't find my voice and say anything. The most I could do would be to leave. And that's what substantial numbers of men and women did do. That wasn't why I left, by the way. So that's the answer, to that question. That's my response to that question anyway. It's not really an answer. It's just a thought. What the cover-up has been so immense, Kieran, that people thought that joining the Christian Brothers was a safe thing to do. My own brother-in-law joined them. I don't know what's happened. He's not in great shape. People join those orders expecting them to be safe, only to find out that some of the behaviours and rituals and practices that were covered up and acceptable inside the group in a closed system or in a seminary went without notice, and they got trapped. And for some of them, then they turned into repeating that behaviour down the line. That's about all I could add to that comment, Kieran.
Well, thanks very much, Michelle.
Okay.
Okay, any more questions? Michelle, thank you very much. As always, your contributions are remarkable, and I deeply value your friendship. We've been at this coalface. I've been at this coalface for a very short time compared to you. So thank you for all your wisdom and your insight and your endless support.
Thank you, Murray, and good luck for the rest of the conference. Have a blast, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.